Come on down, come on down. What do they say? Like eyes on me, or like what teachers do? I forget. I don't know. I'm not exactly a teacher. So we have a few more speeches, which for me is a wonderful thing to see so many people that care so much about my dad, to see so many people here, such a beautiful, touching thing. So we have to split them up into 3 categories, one for me and one for Sadie. So there'll be 2 speeches now, and then we'll close it out. So the next speaker is Tom Shimotake, who's one of those July residents that we're excited about. Carried out to do a fellowship and such a unique opportunity to train with someone. It's in theory a few years, but it's such a meaningful, impactful thing. And I know they've been close from the mentor, mentee, the colleagues moving forward. So thank you for being here. We're excited to hear your words.
Thank you so much. I'm Tom Shimotake. I was fortunate to train under Bill. Bill was my very first attending of my intern year, so July, I was speaker July residence. And he was also my last attending of fellowship 6 years later. Somewhere in between those 2 milestones, I fell in love with the guy. And it was probably just a few minutes after I first met him. He was a trusted advisor through residency. He was the man who offered me a fellowship position in neonatology here at the University of Chicago. The moment I walked into his office to ask for career advice, just on the spot, which you would never hear about these days because everything's a match. But back then, he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself and set my career in motion. He was a mentor to my wife, Janet, who is here with me today. While she was a resident and I was a fellow, and he also sponsored us for our wedding reception at the faculty club. So he is a dear and close friend to our family. But back to my intern year, Bill was acutely aware of the challenges and opportunities that came with each new batch of interns in July. So he always volunteered to take service that month. Maybe he was worried for the babies and wanted to keep a closer eye on us, but it was serendipitous for me. I remember the first day of service when he walked into the NICU. We had all pre-rounded and we were standing around, looking sheepish, not really sure we were doing the right thing. We had our stacks of notes and flow sheets, and we were quite terrified. Bill walked into the NICU, bigger than life, and smiling and chanting, called out, "All of medicine is in neonatology." It was like he was quoting somebody famous, which of course he was, Bill Meadow. He walked up to me and said, "Hi, I'm Bill Meadow. Welcome to the NICU, you're gonna love it here." I think he even danced a little jig in his clogs. And in my memory, I kind of conflated with Gene Wilder in that opening scene of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. But he was clearly in his element, and he loved it, and he made us love it, and he just exuded a kind of confidence and love that we just wanted to follow. In the years that followed, even after Janet and I moved to San Francisco to start our own careers and raise our own family, we turned to Bill for advice and perspective. There are so many ways that Bill influenced many of us as physicians, as academics, but I'll speak about the ways that Bill impacted my life personally, or as Robin Williams calls it in the movie Good Will Hunting, the good stuff. Janet and I always look forward to our regular meetings with Bill, which were veiled as the annual Pediatric Academic Society conference. This was a time where we could get together and catch up and share stories about our family. And one year we were talking and Bill started asking us about our kids, and the topic of kids came up. And Janet and I already had a boy and a girl, but we were feeling like we had full-time jobs and things were so busy, we could barely keep our head above water. We wanted to have more children, but again, we just didn't feel like we could manage with our busy schedules. course, Bill knew exactly what we were talking about. And to give a little context, Janet and I are both on faculty at the same university, just like Bill and Susan. The main difference being that we never amounted to much. But I digress. We told Bill we wanted more babies and didn't think we could manage a third child. We marveled at how he and Susan raised 3 brilliant children while also having such full careers themselves. Bill could see that we were overthinking it. And he said, "Oh, you gotta have a third kid. Kids are like pancakes. You gotta have at least 3 before you get it right." Of course, he was joking, and we all know that Bill and Susan made 3 perfect pancakes in a row. But that was Bill, always ready with a perfect quip to make you smile and not take yourself too seriously. Janet and I did end up with a third child, and Bill probably had more to do with that than I should admit. Bill was the most transparent human being I have ever known. There was no pretense, and you always knew what you were getting. He couldn't help but share his feelings and brag about Susan or the kids or the White Sox, not necessarily in that order. But he also destroyed my notions of work-life balance. He taught Janet and I to see it all as one big symphony and embrace it all rather than something to compartmentalize and partition away from each other. It became the most natural thing for us to share stories about our lives with the nurses and the staff in the NICU, and vice versa. In fact, the bonds that we made with our NICU families, work families, both here in California, have been some of the most enduring and enriching of our professional lives. If Janet and I felt we were barely keeping our heads above water, Bill showed us that it was all right to dive in and go amphibious. Thank you, Bill, for showing us where the good stuff is. May his memory be a blessing.
Next up we have Bridget Spelke. So Bridget's a family friend, moms, our colleagues and friends, and she's been around forever. She went under the wing of Bill for a bit and helped, certainly got into where she is now. I'm so excited. Thank you for coming. Well, excited to hear your words.
Hi everyone. My name is Bridget Spelke. I'm an obstetrician and a global health researcher, and I live in Zambia, and I really hope that I'm the person who traveled furthest. I truly love my work. It's maybe surprising that a neonatologist from Chicago is the person who put me on this career path in global women's health, but it is nonetheless true that I simply would not be here today, like many of us, if it wasn't for Bill. Bill and Susan have long been close family friends of my parents, but I first met Bill as an undergraduate at McGill. Having learned that I wanted to go to medical school, Bill reached out to help me, and after that one brief conversation, it launched a decade of professional guidance, boundless personal support, and of course, vigorous debates about what choices we make, the places and people we choose to invest ourselves in, and the implications of those decisions. I want to share just a few ways in which Bill shaped me into the adult that I am today, and the first is about Bill, the mentor. In 2007, Bill introduced me to Annie Janvier at McGill at a time when she was still just a budding clinical ethics researcher who needed help from a research assistant gathering data. Annie and Bill put me to work gathering data on the cost of unregulated in vitro fertilization in Canada. And when the abstract was accepted as an oral presentation for the Pediatric Academic Society, they made the very surprising decision that the undergrad, me, should give the oral presentation at the conference. And so that's how I found myself in a hotel lobby in Hawaii, sitting between Bill and Annie the day before the presentation, running through my slides and revising all of the words that I would be saying. And to this day, my talks still reflect Bill's advice that I learned that hour. I use slides that are mostly white. My text is black and large, the message as simple as possible. And if I get lost or nervous, I read the fucking slide. But Bill didn't stop there. The next night, he invited me to what I understand is an annual tradition, a reunion of all the Chicago neonatologists at PAS at a lively bar dinner event. And with the invitation came this mysterious comment that he had a plan for me that he needed to share. And so I stood around this crowded restaurant, awkwardly half the average age of people in the room and nowhere near as accomplished. And I watched as Bill laughed and hugged and celebrated all of his trainees and colleagues from across the years, and thought, wow, these people are incredibly lucky. At the end of this evening, Bill sat me down and shared his plan. Bridge, he said, here's the deal. You're moving to Chicago. You're going to work on my studies. You're going to retake the MCATs. And then you're going to reapply to medical school, and this time we're going to get you in. Keep in mind, this was the second time I had ever spoken to Bill in person. And though I thought it was a bit strange, I did not hesitate. And 2 months later, I found myself here in Hyde Park carrying candy around the NICU in exchange for clinical prognostications. It's hard to overstate how much that year in Chicago shaped me and my future. Bill introduced me to clinical medicine and to clinical research. He shared his infectious excitement when deciding how to analyze and interpret data, urging me to think hard from different points of view and to question what we know, why we know it, and how time will change both of those things. He included me in vibrant and engaging meetings at hospitals and ethical committee meetings, where he somehow managed to be simultaneously alarmingly blunt and disarmingly loving with both his trainees and his colleagues alike. That year under Bill's wing led me to Emory Medical School and to another mentor, Ira Schwartz, who further shaped the rest of my career. I hope that these stories also convey that Bill was much more than a mentor and impacted so much more than just the professional side. Bill and Susan welcomed both my brother and me into their home on countless occasions while we each lived in Chicago, be it for memorable and unique Passovers or simply a chat around the dinner table. Bill showed me that he believed in me when there was very little evidence or reason that he should. And just like a family member might, and his support and care extended not just to me, but to my mother as well, whom he always made sure to remind me I had to prioritize in my decision-making. While in Chicago, he would regularly send email updates to my parents on how I was doing because he knew that I wasn't. And years later, on my match day, Bill learned that I had matched near home in the Boston area and celebrated the news a little unconventionally. "This is so great," he wrote me, "for the hospital, and especially for your mother, who now gets to be close to her grandchildren." Being Bill, he occasionally flipped the script as well, sending me emails from cognitive science conferences that he attended abroad with Susan. "My mom is about to give a big talk to a huge audience," he told me, "and she looks very nervous, but he knows she's going to do well." Bill provided a model of adulthood that made me want to grow into the physician, the scientist, the partner, the parent, the daughter that I still strive to be today. His genuineness, his fearlessness in being himself, his total enjoyment of life, and his bottomless ability to see the best in everyone around him have always been signposts for how to live well and celebrate what really matters. This was perhaps most apparent in how Bill talked about Susan in his daily life. At one memorable day, walking with Bill at Cobra Children's Hospital, Bill mentioned that he would soon be flying to the West Coast to see my Susan because she was there alone on sabbatical and he needed to go grocery shopping to stock her fridge. I gave him a funny look, and Bill explained that Susan loves her work so much that she sometimes forgets to eat, much less buy groceries, and so he always had made sure that she had access to food. I didn't understand this fully at the time, but today I have absolutely no doubt that if Bill and my partner now could sit down and talk, they would have eerily similar stories about the truly extraordinary support that they happily and proudly provide to their sometimes distracted academic spouses. Several years ago, I think at the Festschrift that was organized, I heard someone who is probably here today describing that in many ways, Bill's life work was to help kids grow up. with a kid being anyone who needed any help finding their way. I am immensely fortunate to count myself, as so many of you are, as one of those kids that was coached again and again. And though I miss Bill immensely, I carry with me all of these versions of Bill, the mentor, the unconditional advocate, and the generous and loving human being. Thank you, Bill.
Okay. All right, so we have one more from me, and then we'll do another 10-minute break or so, grab another glass of wine, and then a couple more as anyone introduce. So these are some words from Jim Chandler, who's a High Park family friend, coach, you all know Jim. I'm so sorry to be 4,000 miles away, and very grateful to Susan for asking me to provide a few words about Bill. So excited to be reading at his memorial, postponed as it is by almost 2.5 years. The postponement has meant, of course, that this event is taking place unusually long after we lost our beloved Bill. Somehow, the last time seems to matter less with someone like him than it otherwise might. What I mean is that in addition to his life well lived as husband, father, friend, doctor, teacher, ethicist, coach, and mensch, Bill managed to leave us all with an extraordinarily vivid sense of who he was and what he stood for. Part of what makes Bill so personally vivid, even in retrospect, is remarkable decisiveness. This may have come from his training as a neonatologist, where hesitation at the wrong moment could cost a life. But even in extraordinarily ordinary circumstances, Bill would give you a decisive opinion so quickly and with such conviction behind it about politics, sports, community affairs, that it could take you years to figure out that he wasn't always absolutely right. But you were never in any doubt about his views, and you weren't likely to forget them. Another thing about Bill that left a great impression was his voice. And I don't just mean his singing voice, of which he was right and proud, and which not reluctant to show off. I mean his voice of exhortation, which he had extraordinary power. My first encounter with him was as an opposing coach in Pee Wee baseball. I'd have my 7-year-olds gathered around in a tight circle for a teachable moment in the dugout, but they would all be listening to Bill on the other sideline, booming benignly about his own players. It was the kind of voice I first heard when I was a kid myself in Yankee Stadium, where there was always one fan who could make himself heard above all others in the stands, telling Whitey Ford not to throw the curveball. Now, being able to beat Bill, I joined him. And our years together coaching Schmoke and Michael and their teammates will always remain fixed and cherished in my memory. I can still hear Bill calling to our second baseman, Nicky Pagoria, I've known you forever, I love you, you cannot field a ground ball with your glove in that position. And then there is the vivid impression left by the experience of his generosity in small things and large. He was always there to help when needed. Dr. Bill, can I help you? Hi, Bill, I'm in Stockholm and Becky's suffering abdominal pain. Okay, here's what you need to do. Bill took care of another generation of Chandlers too, when Catherine would call him for health advice about her 2 sons, Jack and Sam. I won't rehearse the countless thoughtful presents I've had from him and Susan, a t-shirt from Jersey Boys, the amazing cake they had made for my book launch. I still drink coffee every day out of a large cup that says Dad, that Bill gave me at a Father's Day breakfast. I have other ways to remember him too. I now listen faithfully to Sports Radio 670, where he routinely called in as Coach Bill from Hyde Park. Whenever I listen, it raises a vain hope that I might consult with him about the latest disappointment of our local teams. All of us Chandlers, all of us here, will have our own mementos of Bill's generosity, and we of course cherish them all. With Bill, though, we don't need to depend on these little memory aids. It doesn't make us miss him any less. But still, with impressions of the man himself that remain so strong, so alive, you don't need any help bringing him fully back into your mind. It still feels as if he's just a phone call away, ready to help. Thank you.